Welcome to this new edition of my photographic notes. This one's for November 2021. So for those who don't know, I will be discussing photos I took in November 2021 or edited, and talk about equipment, anecdotes and whatever. Again, for those who speak French, there's a French-speaking channel with the same photos discussed in French, so you might want to check it out. So let's go, let's start. So those two first photos are in Oslo, taken with a Leica rangefinder M240 camera and using a Summicron C 40mm f2.0 lens. I actually really like 40mm. 35 is a little too wide for me, and 50 is, I love 50s, but sometimes they lack a little bit of more space. And so the 40 is actually an interesting range. I really like street photography with the 40mm. And Leica made this 40mm f2.0 for a very specific camera, which was the Leica CL camera, film camera, which came just after the Leica M8. And besides this Summicron lens having this really Summicron-like rendering of colors and geometry and bokeh, that camera was made with Minolta. It was a collaboration with Minolta in order to have a light meter which would have been very precise. And so actually Minolta had the same camera which was named Minolta CLE with equivalent lenses. And so this 40mm is actually not that rare because it was supposed to be a low budget Leica camera for Leica to try to rebound on the market that was being lost to reflex cameras. But it's definitely of the same generation as the Summicron 35mm f2 V3 of the 1970s. But it's super compact, so I really like that lens for traveling. Again, same camera setting, same rendering, optically speaking. But here we see lower light photography with, again, I've talked about that in previous episodes. The sensor's characteristic, when pushed to the maximum for here, low lights, will come out. And so we will have this greenish looks of low lights being pushed back up in post-production. But still very... I like that kind of grain on that kind of camera. That's something you won't really find in your M version Leica cameras or any other version, for the matter of new digital cameras that are very sensitive in low lights. Again, walking around, this is definitely a great setup, in my opinion. Rangefinder, 40mm f2.0, not too shallow. Very compact. I kind of like the color rendering, and Oslo is a really nice city to walk around. Besides the people being really friendly, there's lots of things going on in terms of constructions. There's new neighborhoods near the waterfront. I'll be coming to photos of these later. Again, nighttime on the left, one of the streets of central Oslo, just walking around, having those November looks with the small rain. Again, I think that's definitely the typical rendering of that camera plus that lens. It's soft, it's precise, very poppy. I think it's I don't know if that's what other people mean by 3D looks. It's very, I feel the 3D-ness of that picture on the left. On the right, same setup, Oslo Bay, sunset, that's and those big boats. So I would recommend Oslo if you like Nordic countries. Great place. Again, you see the grain when I push the low lights on the right side of this right photo, because the dynamic range of this camera is a little bit limited compared to modern cameras. Well, you get that grain, and I think it gives it some texture, some character. I was talking about those new neighborhoods on the waterfront. That's behind this huge building on the left photo, which is the Munch Museum, behind the Oslo Opera. There's also, from where I took that picture, there's this new neighborhood that's almost looks like it's floating on water. It's a great place if you like architecture. It hasn't been finished a long time ago, but it's really beautiful architecture, contemporary architecture, and very lively. I mean, it's living spaces for real people. So there's lots of things going on, and super interesting for photographic purposes. Here again, 2 photos, low light. On both of those photos, you see, because I had to push a little bit the lower lights in post-production, you see the characteristic of the CMOS of this M240 camera that come out with some grain and those greenish hues, which, like a film, to me, gives it a character that you will not have with another camera. And again, this lens, which is a rather old design, but yeah, worked great. Here again, on this travel, I really traveled with very few cameras. I had this Leica M240, this basically 40mm lens, and also some film cameras with me. Here, those 2 other photos. The photo on the right is still Oslo during the night with the M240. Yeah, I kind of like that photo, more like a touristy photo. It reminds me of the place, and yeah, it sort of reminds me also that I took pictures, and that's the shadow shows how I take pictures. Anyhow, and you see those grain characteristics of that sensor. And on the left, that's film. And for those who've seen the other previous videos, I like film. I like APS film, which is expired film by default, because they don't make those film formats anymore, those cartridge film format that go in specific cameras that don't accept anything else. And here it's a Contax TiX camera from 1997 with a 28mm f2.8. And basically, for those who like Contax, it's the equivalent of the Contax T line, which had 38mm f2.8 lenses. But because the film was smaller, they compensated that by making it a 28mm. So it's not exactly the same rendering, which we don't really see in this photo, because it's a flash photo by night using an expired Agfa Nexia A200 film that was expired in 2001. So, yeah, 20 years old expired film. It's not giving all the credits needed for that lens and camera, but yeah, just to say it's a 16.7 by 30.2 millimeter size film, which actually historically gave the size of the APS-C sensors afterwards. Yeah, just an anecdote. The next 2 photos, again, I can't enough recommend that you, if you like film or if you don't like film, to go with film once in a while. The process is different. The results are definitely different than with digital cameras. And I like to put films, all kinds of weird films, or not even weird films, in different small cameras that I will randomly pick up and take a few photos with, either when traveling or just going out in town for a walk. Here on the left we have a Ferrania 50 ISO film from Ferrania, using an Olympus XA rangefinder camera. This tiny cameras I really like. They're fantastic optical properties. 35mm f2.8, made between 1979 and 1985, I believe. It's an aperture priority. You set the focus, the aperture, and it just figures out the exposition time. It's usually pretty good at it, so it rarely fails. And here it's probably, I don't really remember, but I think it's Jura Mountains on the eastern part of it in Switzerland, with Germany on the other side. On the right, that's a Werra 2. It's a German-made camera with a 50mm f2.8 lens on it. It was interesting because it was built by the factory, the Carl Zeiss Jena factory. And Werra is a small river that was going around. That's why they gave the name of Werra. And to advance the film and the mechanics, you had to rotate the base of the lens. So it's an interesting camera. It looks different, definitely. You can search on the internet, or I might do a video about it one of these days. And the lens cap, actually acts as a flare protector if you turn it around. But anyways, it's got a very soft but defined lens, and on this photo, I was using the Czech Republic-based Fomapan 100 film. But I didn't. The settings on this camera, it hasn't got a light sensor, so I kind of went for my feeling of the scene, and I had to push it a little bit, so it's kind of grainy. But I do like the rendering of the small boat. Same thing for the Ferrania photo on the left. Ferrania film is quite dynamic, and it pushes really the dynamics of whites and blacks. It's kind of black and white, strongly contrasty. Film sometimes gives you interesting results. And on this next picture on the left, that's Fomapan 100 again. It's kind of a dusty film, like I'm really used to do. Not on purpose, but I might discuss that another time, but I don't really care for these kinds of photos. And that's in a Fujica GW690 6x9 camera from 1978, which has a 90mm f3.5 lens and uses 120 or 220 rolls of film. On this camera, 120 film will give you 8 exposures, and it's a leaf shutter in the lens. You can't change the lens, and this camera was developed for photos of tourists in Japan. So basically professional photographers taking photos of tourists. So they're quite sturdy, robust. There's no light meter on it, but it's fun to use. This photo it was in a forest in the Jura state of Switzerland. It's a northern part of central Switzerland. And on the right, going back to digital, M240 camera and an Elmarit M 90mm f2.8 lens. So really pushing the limits of this sensor, because basically the moon is quite bright and the leaves around are not that bright, and there were some city lights around it in the city, which gives it those warm tones on the grayish parts, on the less bright parts of the sky. And I had to push it, so we definitely see again the characteristics of the grain of the sensor. And here's the more magenta-like character of the saved data. Next photos. Oh, here we're going to Prague. When traveling, I really enjoy those M8 Leica cameras. Again, I repeat myself, but for those who've seen the other videos, it's the only non-full frame digital sensor from Leica. And so basically here, using the same Summicron 40mm f2.0 I was using at the beginning of this presentation, I do get a tighter focal range, basically like on a Micro Four Thirds. And this camera has a CCD, has a really interesting, warm, soft color rendering. nature. So it's great for, it's pretty compact, it's pretty heavy, makes a weird noise. It's definitely not fast. So I'm not going to take 50 pictures at once. It's something like, I may be exaggerating, but it's something like 1 photo a second max. So again, on this sensor, it's even less sensitive than the M240. So that's by night on the left. The photo is on one of those famous bridges of Prague. It's probably 3:30 in the morning. So yeah, but the ambiance was really super interesting with those birds. Note, I don't I don't modify the subject of my photos. So that's how it was. So here I took probably 20 or 25 pictures of that scene until I found the right composition. And because it's so dark, really pushing the camera to its limits, you definitely see the grain of that CCD sensors, those lines, and the greenish, magenta-ish characteristics of the lowlights, and those you see that, for example, the dark parts on the left lower side of the picture, they're going to sort of ghost on the same line. It's a very interesting rendering of the CCD. Many people don't like it. I do like the nature of sensors in film. So I think it adds to the character, to the strong and weird feel of this picture. On the right, same thing, one of those old cars. It's in Prague too. A nice old Opel, if I remember right, car, a Cadet or something like that. And I liked how the guy or the girl actually what they did with this old car and make it so nice. Let's continue. Oh, totally different. Here we're going back to a Canon 6D CMOS sensor with a 400mm f4.5 lens, Sigma, mid-90s. Yeah, it's already an apochromatic lens, so very precise rendering. Those lenses are real bargain on the second-hand market. You just need to beware that some of those lenses, electronics, because it's EOS lenses, they don't communicate well with modern Canon cameras. You better check. But on the 6D, for example, I know this lens, I can't work with it. I can only work with it with maximum aperture. So otherwise it bugs. So that's what I do. Pictures of the same place, actually. Both photos the same place from a different point of view at different times. For the first time this month, most of us who take pictures, we do have cameras. What we consider real cameras, standalone cameras, film or digital, but we take pictures with our phones. And for those who don't know, I'm an experimental photographer, and I do software for my phones. So I fine-tune the algorithms, and I create my own image rendering software apps. And here I will be talking about the selection of this month. So I'll now regularly show some of the photos I took with my phone and with my own apps. So first app, Camare, Camare. It's an app it's basically my do-it-all app. That's where I test my new algorithms. And so those 3 photos are in Prague. And so how it works, my photo engine, the one I developed, is basically a combination of filters and different buses, image buses. It can get complicated, but anyhow, basically it's a creative filter and a simulation of sensor or printer or film, and it's a mix of those using my proprietary software, and that's what it does. So on the left, actually on all of those photos, I used this creative filter, which I named DNAZ, which I call also those creative filters I call insaturators, because they saturate the signal that's coming in. And then there's an analog film simulator. Usually they're based on, I don't know exactly which one this one is, but they're based on real films that I used, most often expired film, because I like that. But those three next pictures, same thing, on the left and on the right, on the far left, far right, it's the same setup, software setup as before. Always here, it's again the Camare app. For those who are interested, it's a Camare Creative Camera app for iPhone only, because I'm a lone coder. Maybe one day I'll do it for Android, but actually the Apple ecosystem it was already quite some work to make something that works how I want it. So, and I definitely use it for my own practice. So, sorry, Android users. Maybe one day. Hopefully one day. Would be interesting. So here, the middle photo is the input creative filter. The insaturator is probably the RDR, Ach Dr in German. It doesn't mean anything, but and simulation of thermal color, thermal printer. That's the middle photo. And I'm not sure where that is. It's probably in Prague, but also the Prague airport, but not sure. The next three photos, same thing on the left, this RDR insaturator with a film simulation overlaid. In the middle, that's probably a creative filter I call Booty. And it dates, actually, it's a filter that I developed before the iPhone existed, for Sony. I don't know if some of you who are old enough remember Sony had some camera phones. And so I developed this algorithm for a Sony 2 megapixel camera phone, which had a great lens compared to what used to exist before. And if you're interested, there's a project where all those photos using that algorithm and camera, that was in 2007, which is named Booty Machine. You can find the link from my website. And then on the right, same thing as the far left picture, the Ach Dr filter, which kind of solarizes the highlights, and basically a film simulation afterwards that overlays. Just for the information, those apps, it's not post-production. Actually, that's when you take the picture, the process is done. Here again, those three photos. On the left, Ach Dr insaturator and a film simulation. In the middle, I'm not very sure. I would say a DNAZ insaturator and some kind of film simulation. And on the right, definitely the Ach Dr and a film simulation. All those algorithms I developed them such as you can slightly modify them and learn how to use them for them to give. At first, I tried to have them give what I want. So they react, and once I practice with them, they react in a more analog way. That's what I'm searching, trying to make digital feel analog. And I'm not saying only in the resulting picture, but in the way you use them, the way you think the photograph. So the far left photo, the photo was the M8 with the birds, and I was taking on Prague. That's the same bridge, and taken with this Camare app using the Ach Dr insaturator, which is pretty good at boosting low lights in very low light environments, and some kind of simulation, probably film simulation. The middle photo it's a multi-exposition. This Camare app lets you do multiple expositions. It's a weird process to do it. It's rather simple, but it's not like like one would usually do. I'm still experimenting with this, but yeah. And this reversal negative look to the picture is basically because when you push some of my insaturator creative filters, when you push them in in post-production, sorry, and you increase really strongly the contrast, they will sometimes reverse. So it's fun. It's a fun process. At least I like it to mess around those filters, those algorithms I have included. And yeah, and there's probably a CCD sensor simulation overlaid. And on the right, that's a multi-exposition with always the same image, but going through different filter buses in the Camare app, which give it this really eerie look. And afterwards, obviously, also a film simulation. Those 3 photos, at the time in Prague, the far left photo, that was a new creative filter that I tried to render the looks of a lens that would be slightly de-aligned in terms of color channels. So it sort of distorts some of the color channels, but in a weird way, which makes it, in my opinion, more analog. And so that's a new insaturator, which I named Semi, and a film simulation added overall. The middle picture is probably the same setup, but the multi-exposition. And the far right picture, that's that bridge where the birds were taken at the same time. And that's where the sensor is. It's an iPhone X, if I believe, I was using, because I have many different models to test the apps. But my main phone is an iPhone X. And we see that, it's not sensitive in the way that you can really capture those birds rapidly enough and well enough to make it look nice. But using this Ach Dr insaturator in a film simulation, that's what you can kind of get using software. Again, software, and that's an iPhone 12 Pro Max, if I believe the middle photo. The 3 photos must be done with it. It's a far left picture, that's the Ach Dr insaturator in a film simulation. In the middle, it's probably a DNAZ insaturator with a film overlay, not the same as the far left photo. And on the right, it's a Bewi insaturator, which kind of simulates black and white film, black and white rendering with old optical formulations of old lenses, and gives it maybe something similar to, if you remember the Fomapan pictures I took before. But that's again with this Camare app. Those 3 pictures, what can I say? On the left, it's again this, I believe here it's also the iPhone 12 Pro Max. So a really good camera setup for a phone. And on the left, it's probably the semi-insaturator with those weird color distortions, as you can see on the clouds in the contrasty zones, and some kind of film simulation over it. In the middle, I have strictly no idea, but I kind of like the looks of what came out of it. And on the right, far right, that's a DNAZ insaturator, which tends, if now you don't know the app well, but when you start knowing this insaturator, it tends to flatten the dynamic range and makes things look more flat. But without I tried to make it such that it doesn't lose the detail and the organic feel of the scenes, and a film simulation overlaid on this multi-exposition, which was done with the DNAZ insaturator. Here again, 3 photos. The left photo, we're not really sure. It's a multi-exposition, that I'm sure. And then probably I've added a few layers, including some semi-insaturator and booty insaturator and some film simulations. The middle picture is definitely Ach Dr. Ach Dr was sort of some kind of, sounding joke I wanted to make for HDR. Definitely it's not the same result. But this insaturator really boosts the low light detail and tries to keep in control the highlights. So you get those weird results. And on the right, HDR and probably a film simulation on top. Here you definitely see how it boosts anything it has in low lights and tries to make it visible. So yeah, I've had fun developing these insaturators. On the left, those 3 new pictures, DNAZ on the far left, and some film simulation. In the middle, that's a multi-exposition with RDR. And on the right, same thing, multi-exposition, RDR, again, film simulation overlaid. Okay, so yeah, thanks for sticking with this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, at least a little bit, and maybe it gave you a few ideas where to go or what to do else, or just, yeah. Or you just enjoyed it. So don't hesitate to post some comments or questions below, and see you next time.